Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Albers, and welcome here to our special podcast we got going on today. And I know we've talked about this for a long time, Steve, and we've been working on it. We're here doing our top 10 quarterbacks in Anderson history on the Big AHS Sports podcast on USBN Sports, and always is joining me is Steve Ellison. Steve, I'm excited to do this podcast. I know you and I have been talking about it for a while. I don't think we really understood what we got ourselves into, because I think this ended up being a harder task than what we realized, and there's a lot of good quarterbacks in Anderson High School history.
Well, there's a long history, and this is the fun part, and I know it's really fun for you because you've been a part of Anderson football for 40 plus years now, so you have a lot more knowledge than I do. I was more in the stands,
right,
and you're going to know a lot more than I will, but I can definitely help with some input on some of the unbelievable athletes that play quarterback at Anderson.
Yeah, and so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of explain kind of how we came up with our top 10. As everybody knows, we blasted this out on social media. We kind of tallied up the votes that we got from people, and then we put those together to formulate the top 10. But I think the hardest thing, Steve, just talk about trying to get this information. I think it was a little bit harder to do than what we imagined.
Well, there's like 4 different steps here, basically trying to gather all this information and then trying to figure out how do you come up with a top 10, because there's different types of coaches that had different types of quarterbacks, right, running, throwing, and especially like the most recent coach that we have that throws the ball almost every down. So it's difficult to try to compare apples to apples, but gathering stats, looking at yearbooks, talking to family members, friends, people in the community, John Raymond and people like that have some history. Dan Bartholomew, that was a teacher, and just going all the way back trying to find some stats. And we have a little bit of a nugget on some stuff, not a whole lot, but just enough to talk about and just be interesting for people to hear this.
Well, I think the example that we have to throw out is in most recent times that everybody's kind of familiar with. Let's go from 1987 to 1999, right? And this was brought up, and as I was bringing this discussion up, Vince kind of threw this out. He says, you have to keep in mind that, the era is different. Back in those days with Vince Soriano, they ran the I formation. Right. They didn't throw the ball a lot because they didn't need to, because they had stud running backs.
Correct. So
we have to keep that in mind. So what I'm basing mine on, and I'm sure you probably do the same thing, is not only stats have a lot, but that's not the primary factor in it, because you can't really go by that. It's leadership.
Yep.
What we've heard from the community, what we've heard from the voting, other things that they've done, community, all that stuff is a big factor in this. So that's what, because if you look at that compared to Dreyer, like you said, Dreyer throws the ball a ton.
Right.
Well, you can, and we're going to give some stats. You're going to look at somebody that I'm going to bring up, and you're going to be amazed at what his stats were during the running time with Vince. Think about what he would have done with Dreyer.
Correct.
So we got to keep that in mind.
That makes it hard. And the other thing I look at, Danny, is how athletic some of these guys were. Not just throwing the ball, but you talk about leadership. Did they play other sports? It just everything that kind of goes into it, and how much of a gamer they were. Yep. And that's just basically the stuff that we know. And I know you did some homework on guys going all the way back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and so this will be fun to do. Yeah, I can't wait to get into it. Again, we got to preface all this by, I've heard stories about. Let's go back to a lot of these people out here listening don't know about the guys in the 40s, the guys in the 50s. Right. I've heard stories. I've heard things about leadership. So that's what we're going to kind of get into too. Try to be fair. Yep. So I think you're up on the. Well, we talked about like the going back to the all the way back to where it started. Right. And I know you've had some communication, and you had just put out there on social media about how you got some game film even from the 60s. I can't wait to watch that. But going all the way back, so the first quarterback going all the way back to 1948, Danny, was, and this Anderson team was undefeated. Right. And I don't know if you have that on your wall over here. 47. Yeah, there we go. We did. 1948 undefeated. 48 9-0. Yeah, was Bob Moore. Yeah, and Steve, the interesting story about that is, so obviously we don't have film, we don't have stats. They ran a predominantly run-oriented team, but
we have to start with Bob Moore because they went undefeated.
How'd you get that information? How'd you know that?
Just from Charles Brown. So Charles Brown Jr.
Yeah. Right.
So we're doing this documentary in Anderson High School history, and I just listened to the stories that he told me about with leadership with Bob Moore, and so I got to tell you about this. This story that Charles Brown told us, right?
Sure.
So first of all, undefeated.
Yep.
First undefeated team in Anderson High School. That's a big bonus right there, right?
Yep.
Big quarterback. But here's the story that Charles Brown told me was there was a game that Bob Moore broke one for a long distance. He was probably going to go, and it was one of those types things where when you're the quarterback and you either make the option of pitching it or running it. Bob Moore decided to run it, and as he was running, he stopped like 5 yards, 6 yards short of the end zone and pitched it back to his running back so his running back can score.
Really?
That right there tells you about leadership right there.
Wow.
He wasn't worried about scoring. He wasn't worried about it, and he wanted his teammate to get the glory. I don't know if you were there at the when they got inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
Bob Moore was there giving a talk. He was the one that talked forever.
Okay, yep.
And just that right there shows what kind of leader he was.
Wow.
Everybody loved him, wanted him to talk. Man was so excited about Anderson High School football and his teammates, and it gave me goosebumps. Yeah, so that we really have to start something about that. And I knowing that you were there for that, I mean that right there speaks volumes of Bob Moore.
It did, because you could just hear the passion in his voice and just talk about it. And heck, that was what 30, 40 years after the fact.
Absolutely.
No, longer than that, 50 years.
Yeah.
And so just for him to have that feeling that you and I do,
right?
From when you played football, I mean, that's just what the connection is with everybody in the Anderson Alumni Association and that played football at Anderson High School.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really cool thing, and all these guys in the 48s, just a special team, and so that we have to start with that guy. So, but obviously we don't know some of the guys for every single year that's played, so we got to kind of skip, and go quickly into the decade as much for the 50s and. Don't really have too much information on the 50s,
right?
And so we're going to kind of jump to the 60s.
And apologize for that. I mean, and I'm sure there was some great quarterbacks during that era. I'm looking back here, Danny, to see they had some 500 teams. Danny's got this thing on the wall here. Explain what this is, Danny.
So Steve's dad, Bill Ellis, made this chart that we have. It's Anderson High School football records from 1947 all the way up to, I believe, to 76. Has a complete all the scores, like who beat who, who they played, and it's just a really, 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 really neat thing. And it kind of shows you, and it's so old that Steve, it's got schools that aren't even in existence right now. I mean, so
it's really fun to look at. In fact, you should take a picture of that and put it on your
I'll do that.
Website.
Yeah,
for
it's
people
pretty
to
sweet.
see.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, but as we're going through this, Danny, the one things we have to think about as we're trying to evaluate, and just fun to talk about, just opinions. It's what did these quarterbacks do? Did they lead them to league championships? Were they all league? Were they all city? Were they all state? All those things that come into play. How many years did they play quarterback? Were they just 1 year, their senior year? Did they play your sophomore, junior year? So all those things that we're trying to come into play here, and that could talk about their records, where they stand on the list for yards and things like that. So those are the things that we have to
keep in mind,
take into consideration here.
Yeah, we have to. Yeah. But and we got to think about all these championships. Obviously we talked about 48.
Yep. And
I think our next one is we got to jump into 61.
Yeah.
And Steve, this one's kind of messed up. Obviously, we can't talk about, we can't give the stats, we can't give the eras. We don't have all that information from 1961, right? But I did talk to Bob Wilhoit, who we're going to have featured on our Anderson documentary.
Okay.
Played on 1961 team. He was a running back. Talked to him this morning, and I said, hey, I want to know who the quarterback was, because I wasn't real sure myself, and I knew he was good. I just, and you're not going to believe this, man. They had a double quarterback. Okay, and
you got to explain this.
Right, so I'm going to explain this. It was called a side saddle T, is what it was called, and so they had two quarterbacks basically. Okay, so we got to give it to both of these quarterbacks. Okay, that's just my opinion, because they won the league.
Yeah.
So they had two quarterbacks. Ken Burns, who was considered the runner, And Jim Dorna was considered the thrower. And so Jim Dorna ended up being all city for passing. It's pretty cool offense. So what they did is the quarterback would be Burns, and he would line up under center, but then he would take his hands, put underneath her, and then he'd step off to the right or to the left. Okay, so he'd stand there. And then you had the throwing quarterback, Jim Dorna, would be on the other side. So whatever the play was called, they would snap it to the guy that's either going to throw it or snap it to the guy that's going to run the ball. And he could either hand it off to somebody, they can throw it to somebody. That's how their offense was run.
So when the center would hike it, I mean, he had to know where he was hiking it to.
Right.
Those guys had to be standing fairly close to one another.
They were.
Right.
And so he would get under center saying, hey, I know I'm ready. Get off to the one side. They figure out what their play is. And then he would have either one guy to the one side and one guy to and he would snap it to whatever side they have it. And so they may call 57, we had like Ram and Liz. Ram meeting to the right, Liz running to the left. That would call the play, so they would know that it's going to the left side of the quarterback. He would then run the play, and that's how they did it.
So why don't they do that more now?
It's just the way the offense is, man. It's just they're all throwing now. I mean it's a really good idea if you think about it. If you're
able to hike it straight to the running back,
right?
Is that saving time to get through the hole?
It could not. And what they did was like Bob Wilhoit was telling me. Bob would then come back and almost like in motion and come and he would hand the ball off to him. So it really messed teams up.
Well, it's got to throw the defense off a little bit.
Yeah, and what was great about that, if you think about that team, we talked about, they won the championship.
Yeah.
They beat Princeton.
So here's the question, the trivia question, Danny, for you. Who was the head coach on that team?
Joe Miller.
Joe Miller.
Thank you very much.
There's that name.
Yeah,
legendary athletic director.
Absolutely, and went on to, UC's got the record or tied the record with Desmond Ritter for the longest run from scrimmage was Joe Miller, and young coach at the time. I think the year before they didn't finish really well, made this offense. And it took off. Yeah. I mean, so that's a big, a big factor, and I think that's a huge thing. But
so take Bob Moore into consideration, obviously these guys too that won the league.
You have to.
Okay.
I mean, if you don't, I mean, it's not fair. I mean, a lot of people out there are watching don't understand what these guys meant to Anderson High School football. And we have to consider all the guys that won a champion, especially the first couple of championships in Anderson High School history.
Yeah.
48, 61, and then you got to go all the way to 1973, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But, Steve, I got another guy that a lot of votes that we did get, but we didn't have a ton of stats on, and know how good he was. And I know that you talked to Dan Bartholomew.
Yeah.
Is Steve Lanhart.
Yeah, Steve Lanhart. So Dan Bartholomew, who is a legendary coach and teacher in Anderson history, actually Forest Hills, he brought up this guy and just talked about what an unbelievable athlete this guy was, and he played multiple sports. So we talk about taking that into consideration. But here's some of the things that I found. So he was a 3-year varsity letter winner. He was first team All-City in 1969. He was honorable mention All Southern Ohio. So it's probably All Southwest like it is today. Then he went on and he played quarterback at Vanderbilt.
Wow.
Pretty strong.
Right.
And he actually played in the 1973 Peach Bowl, which people realize back then there wasn't that many bowls.
Right.
So for him to go and play in there, and he was obviously a smart guy going to Vanderbilt. And he was all academic SEC when he played there, and he just had some unbelievable stats. And then he actually had a cup of coffee for the Green Bay Packers. Playing in their backup squad.
Yeah, that's pretty strong. I mean, that is pretty strong. And if you go on to Vandy's website, you can actually see he has stats on their website.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, he only played 1 year, a couple years. I think he might have not played after that 1 year that he played. But I mean, come on,
how many people can say that?
Right, and our first guy at Anderson High School history to go to the NFL. I mean, that's huge.
Not many, right?
Yeah, that's huge. And then the next one was going to be Norwell and Mans, right?
Unbelievable.
Yeah, so that's a big one to do too. So he's definitely got to be in consideration for the top 10.
All right, so that kind of, from what we gather, going through the 60s. Right?
Yeah. That'll put us to the end of the 60s, heading into the decade of the 70s.
Okay.
And I think what we need to do then is talk about some of these guys in the 70s. And we're going to start off in the early 70s in 1973. And the only reason I'm going to bring him up, he might not necessarily be in the top 10, but in 1973, the quarterback was John Moore, and he won a league championship in 1973. Think about that. And Anderson had some lean years.
I'm turning around.
In 73, I think they won 2 games or lost 2.
73, they were 7-2.
7-2, and they won the league.
Yeah.
John, I don't know.
Any relation to Bob?
It could. I don't know. I'm not sure. I really don't know that. But John did tell me that his stats weren't overwhelming, anything like that. John Raymond was telling us that. So, that's a guy that we have to consider. But, as we said, league championships are going to be a pretty big thing, too, in this.
Well, so, again, this is kind of a little before our time. But just to think about some of the quarterbacks that from what we've gathered, there was Hank Omise, who went on to be a high school head coach.
Yes.
Gym teacher, I believe.
Yep.
Great guy. He quarterbacked for the Redskins back in the 70s, and then a great athlete in Nicky Tarpoff.
Yes.
Was a great quarterback, and he went on to play baseball at UC.
Yeah.
Just another great athlete as well.
Yeah, and and back in the day, Nick Tarpoff not only played quarterback, but he was a linebacker. And he used to always talk about how he played linebacker.
Really?
And he said going both ways. And so he's playing linebacker, and then he'd have to take his arm pads off, throw them off to the side, and go in and play quarterback. So back in the day, I think these guys told me back in the day they only had maybe 23, 24 guys on the team. So a lot of guys had to go both. And that's in the mid-70s.
So who was the coach back then? Was it Carl Seymour? Wasn't he coach for there?
Seymour was around that. Seymour won in 73, and then he had a heart attack.
Okay.
And then someone took over, and can't remember who that was in 75. I get that always mixed up.
Yeah.
But, that just speaks to the volume of Nick Tarpoff. And then I don't know about this one. Mm-hmm. Someone brought up in 1972, Steve Heiss was a quarterback. He got a couple votes.
You're right.
And everybody kind of mixed him up with his son, who played lineman for Vince Soriano, Stephen Heiss.
Right.
So people kind of got that mixed up, and it wasn't. So I don't know enough information about him. Okay. So that's another guy that...
Well, but he's related to Forrest Heiss, who is in the Anderson Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and he got some votes, so he's another guy that had to be considered.
Right, and then to round off the 70s, Danny, is a guy that played quarterback in 79, and Rick Vidos.
Yes.
And he wasn't on a very good team, but had unbelievable stats and was all league. And I think he was honorable mention All City, and he went on to play football at Southwest Missouri State.
Wow.
He was a quarterback there. He actually, from what I heard from my brother Brad and a couple other people, was that he had some looks from even higher up, like Tennessee, to go. Yeah. And I remember watching him play. He had an unbelievable arm. He was a big, strong guy.
Lefty. Wasn't he a lefty?
No. That's Nicky Tarpoff.
Okay.
But big, strong guy, and he was always throwing touchdowns to Quinn Newhall.
Yes,
he was a speedster, and he went on to Air Force, I believe. Yeah,
Quinn Newhall,
but Rick Vidos. I think he played multiple sports. I think he played basketball as well, and I think he played baseball.
Wow.
Yes, in fact, I know he did because he played with Brad. He was a pitcher.
No
so
kidding.
Having an arm like that, so he was an athlete, and the accomplishments that he had. So that kind of throws him into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're kind of burning through this kind of fast, but again, I'm sure there's a lot of other guys in the 70s and that we just don't know.
Right.
And we're going this based on what we have for the votes and everything that's going on.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. So now we got to move on into the 80s, which obviously is a little more familiar to us.
Absolutely. This might help us out a little bit.
Yeah. But as we start getting into the 80s, Danny, we can kind of go year by year.
Right.
And you can there were some lean years there in the late 60s and early 70s. There was one good year, but then late 70s wasn't so much.
80s was bad. Yeah. I'll be honest.
Early 80s was bad.
I was part of that. Yeah, early 80s.
Early 80s. Yeah, but we had some good quarterbacks in there. And when we talk about this, if these quarterbacks we're going to talk about were with some of the athletes that's been at Anderson the last 20 plus years, who knows what kind of stats they could have put up.
Absolutely. I agree.
So let's talk about that. Let's go with the 1981 quarterback, which Jay Scavo.
Yes, I remember watching Jay.
Yeah,
he was good.
He could sling it. I remember watching him. I don't have much stats on him.
Right.
I know he was an athlete. I think he played basketball as well. And he was. I just remember how he was like. I mean, he was like all over the place. Right. He wasn't easy to get down.
Right.
You know, and I know that's not saying it right, but I just remember watching him play. He could juke and jive.
Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah, he was definitely a quarterback that I remember starting when we were getting at that age of really kind of remembering how they were.
Right. You know? Right. The next one is potentially the only father-son duo playing quarterback. This one was Vince Palmer.
Yeah, and then his son went on later on. Yeah,
you know, back in like 2005. Was a quarterback. So Vince Palmer was a quarterback, and he could sling it as well.
Yeah,
don't have much stats on him, but he was in 1982, I believe. No, he was
81.
No, Vince Palmer was 80. Jay Scavett was 81, and then we get into Bob Shingleton.
Yes.
All right, which is very, you know, the whole family's athletes. Yep. The dad played basketball at UC.
Yep.
And, you know, it's funny, most of the Shingletons played soccer, but Bob's the oldest, and he was a starting quarterback. And I can remember him, too. He was a big, strong guy as well.
God, it's just crazy that you think about that. And that's kind of when we start getting into it. And then I remember, I think then next has to be Mike Wan. Mike Wan was on there. Mike was a really good quarterback. He moved in from out of town, came in, and just fit in really, really well with Anderson High School. And he's a part of our, you know, we've done an interview with him on Anderson. LPGA commissioner.
Yeah.
He's got a new position
very successful.
now. But Mike Wan was it. And then I had the fortunate enough pleasure, and he's got some votes. Both these guys got votes, is Randy Cummings.
Okay.
And you and I played with Randy in basketball. And Randy was another one. He started junior and senior year.
Yep.
Good quarterback, can throw the ball, very intelligent, very smart. He's one that can get some serious consideration, and we just don't have his stats on him either.
So he went on to play football at Dayton.
I believe so, yes.
I'm not sure it was actual quarterback. I think they switched him to DB.
I believe so, yes.
You know, like that happens sometimes to guys, depending on what position they play. But yeah, I do remember him going to Dayton.
Well, and the guy that I really liked was, obviously because he threw me the ball.
Of course you would.
Was Jay Sullivan. Jay Sullivan did not start my senior year. He was only a sophomore. Jimmy Bell got hurt, and then he came in, and I'll tell you what, man, he was a good quarterback for a sophomore. I think he played sophomore, junior. He might have had some injuries here and there, and I think he might have played for Vince for 1 year.
Really?
I believe so, because, I think he might have played for Vince close to his senior year. He might have played for 1 year, and then we'll get into the other group that we're going to talk about here coming up soon.
So did Jade move in, or was he already in Anderson?
He moved in.
Okay.
Yeah, he moved in, yep.
Okay, all right. Because I think there was another quarterback, too, that was behind him. Wasn't that Rob McCoy?
Rob McCoy, but Jay Sullivan beat him out.
Jay Sullivan beat him out.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's it.
All right. So now, not to make fun of your era, Danny, of the lean years, but now we start getting into the 90s and how, the amazing stats, the amazing wins and, versus losses for these quarterbacks that we're going to talk about in the 1990s.
Yeah, and I tell you what, that's what's interesting about this whole thing, Steve, when the tide turned for the Redskins, and I'll be honest, I have to start with these guys. They got some votes. Not sure if they'll be in the top 10, but we have to start with these guys that really elevated this program.
Well, before you start, Danny, let's just be very clear about this, that it starts with Vince Sirianni.
Absolutely, it starts with Vince Sirianni.
And the reason why we're talking about this is because of Vince Sirianni.
There's no doubt, because, John Stowe era was more of a running. He liked that power right, power left.
From Ohio State.
Wanted to run the ball, didn't throw it. Vince didn't throw the ball a lot. He ran the ball more early on, but then later on he changed. But the guys that really, really got this started in the era was Mike Goyer and Rob Thuman. I had the privilege of coaching Rob Thuman. Mm-hmm. Great guy, good quarterback, and Vince Sirianni turned around, and then it goes to Jason Bell, and Tim Albers.
Sure.
That's all in the 90s that we know of that we got. But Mike Goyer and Rob Thuman were the ones that started the acceleration of Anderson High School and the tradition and everything that's going on. So
raise the bar.
Those guys, are right there. And so I think what we have to do is, if you look back at it, let's start then with Jason Bell.
Sure.
Okay. Probably, arguably, one of the best teams in Anderson High School history, right?
Yep.
I mean, arguably the best. So when he took his team junior year, 9-1.
First team to go to the playoffs, right?
No, not junior year he didn't. Senior year, he went undefeated, and that was the first team that went to the playoffs. 92, whatever you want to call it.
Gotcha. Yep.
And he did not throw the ball a lot. He didn't have to throw the ball a lot because he had Jason Druso.
Yeah.
I mean, but his leadership, everything that he had going on. So I kind of got to explain, and I think everybody out there that knows about this era, this describes Jason Bell's leadership and what he meant to Anderson High School football.
Yep.
Princeton game, down to the end of the game.
Yep.
When it's fourth and what they're going for it on fourth down, it's either to win the game or you're going to lose, right?
Yep.
Jason Bell gets the line of scrimmage, looks, counts. Oh crap, we got too many guys on the field. Yells at Nate Cosman to get off the field. That could have been a penalty, pushed him back more.
Right.
Rest is history. Jason Druso scored. That right there is leadership to a T for why he's considered on our list.
Well, just a class guy, and he's gone on to be very successful to nobody's surprise.
Right.
He's an eye doctor,
right?
And and I know he's got kids that are going to be coming up here soon that are young, and so no surprise on when you talk about leadership, you talk about Jason Bell.
Oh, he's a born leader, and you can see it when he gets interviewed and during that whole season, and how the guys rallied around him, and I think that rubbed off on the other guys following him.
Yeah. No question about it. Jason was. I mean, I loved watching him play because he was, like a coach on the field.
Absolutely.
Yep. All right. So then we get into it, and you're gonna have to help me on the years here, Danny. But who was first? Because the next one I want to talk about is your brother Timmy.
Right.
All right. Was Timmy before Jason or
Timmy
after?
was after Jason.
Right after Jason.
So Timmy was the punter on that team as a sophomore.
Okay.
And he was the backup quarterback. He was on JV, and then he got hurt. If you remember, Timmy got hurt. Okay. Could not play in the playoff game because he broke his ankle.
I do remember that.
Yep. So Timmy was after Jason.
And if you remember when he broke his ankle, what he was most concerned about
was the dollar bill.
The dollar bill, the lucky dollar bill that was that was taped.
And if anybody doesn't know about that, Mr. Ellis, Steve's dad, would give a lucky dollar bill to a person that he wanted to give him luck, basically.
Give him luck.
And he'd pass it on down the line, and he'd pass it to my brother Timmy, who was a quarterback, and Timmy was worried about that dollar bill and whether it was ruined, and he's got an ankle that's going the opposite way.
Yeah, but Timmy had some really good stats. I loved watching him play.
Yeah.
He was the John Elway is the best way I can describe Timmy, to people that didn't get a chance to watch him.
Timmy didn't look like a quarterback. He looked like a lineman. I mean, he was a big boy back then.
He was a big boy.
I mean, big boy back then.
Yeah. No, but you think about his stats here, and we do have some of that, Danny. He was 18-3 as a starter, which, when you go back to previous, 30 years, that's pretty darn good. He the thing is, he had these great stats, and he made all league and second team all city and stuff like that, but he didn't throw the ball as much as what you would see nowadays. And it's easy to sit here and talk about ifs and buts, but you wonder if Timmy was in Dreyer's type of offense, what kind of yardage and touchdowns he would have.
Well, let me explain this, and this if people they know, I mean, all the people we're talking to that have been around that time,
right? So
Timmy's senior year, 85, 141. 1,490 yards thrown for Vince Soriano, who ran the ball constantly, with a 59.7 completion rate, Steve. That to me, at 14 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. I'm biased. It's my brother.
You can be biased. That's good.
But I believe Timmy deserves some serious credit to be in that top 10. That's just, I am biased, but that right there speaks volume. Again, we're talking about leadership. Just all that stuff, and that's with this.
Okay, well, let's take this thing into consideration here. He was the captain of the football team.
Yep.
He was the captain of the basketball team.
Yep.
And he was a captain of the baseball team, where he went on to play college baseball as a pitcher.
Yep, and that's a huge consideration. And Timmy, at one point, now let's go back.
How many people do that?
All right, and let's go back about this. Let's think about this. At the time, Timmy, he's nowhere near now. At the time, Timmy was in the top 5 in passing at Anderson High School history, or in the top 10, somewhere around it. Timmy
at the time, right?
At the time, right. And then obviously other guys afterwards.
Which was just a standard then,
right? Everybody came afterwards, but that was when they didn't throw the football. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So and he threw to Brian Herford.
Who was it?
Brian Herford, I think it was, or oh God, I'm trying. I can't remember, but always threw that long bomb to him, and that's where they got all the yards. I mean, throwing 85 times, 141 yards.
It's strong. And then you put into the fact that he was, like you said, he was a punter, starting punter as a sophomore, which in a lot of teams and positions, Danny, especially for Vince Ariano, it's very rare for a sophomore to get on the field.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
I know. It really, really is, and I think just for the fact alone, and again, I'm going to be biased on this, and Timmy deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I don't care what anybody says. You can give me, I'm a homer, it's my brother. Hands down, he needs to be in the Hall of Fame, not only for just football, but his other sports too. Baseball, he was a dominant pitcher.
And that ended up being his sport. But, just because he didn't get to throw the ball as much in football.
Right.
But he was a heck of a basketball player. And as I said, he was captain of all three sports. I would say in Anderson high school history, you can probably count on one hand the amount of people that were captain in three sports.
I agree. There's not many.
Yeah.
That
speaks volumes.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So now we're going to get into the decades of the 2000s, right?
Right. And we probably missed a couple.
We did. I know that we've missed some. And again, we've told you this. And I know once we put this out there, people are going to say, "Oh, you forgot about him. Oh, you forgot." Yeah. We're sorry, but we did. We did the best we can. So, so we'll get into the decade of the 2000s. Okay. There's going to be a few here that I know of that will help. Is Kenny Rydell.
Oof.
Matt Dills, Kurt Shoemaker, and Daniel Rodz. So those guys are, pretty good. And I think we should probably start off with Kenny.
Well, let's talk about Kenny, because Kenny was a great athlete. Vince had taken the program to here, and then when you get into 2000, he took it even higher, and he took it there with Kenny Rydell. Raising the bar for what he was able to do.
Right.
I remember watching him play and just being so excited to go watch their team play and watch Kenny play, and just the numbers that he put up. I mean, they were so good.
Incredible.
And he was such an athlete. I mean, I got to coach him in basketball, but just to watch him roll out and as a quarterback, and I mean, it just had to drive the other teams nuts. You didn't know if he's going to throw it or going to run it. And when you ran it, he would duck and dive, and all that dodgeball terms that he would get by guys, and he would get an extra 15, 20 yards every time.
Yep.
And then you go all the way to, I can remember like it was yesterday when they played St. X.
Oh, man.
Oh, I mean, just an unbelievable game that he had and the team had. And it was just a high-powered offense, scoring for both teams, unfortunately. But he had, in that game, over 500 yards.
And that's against a St. X team in the GCL. I mean, you just don't do that.
You don't.
I mean, you just don't do that.
No.
I mean, but like Steve, the other thing, too, you said is he dodged and threw for over 1,000 and ran for over 1,000.
You like the dodgeball terms?
I mean, that's pretty good, man. That's pretty good. So right there, enough on Kenny Rydell is he's got to be considered to be in the top 10. I mean, overall, all around great athlete.
I don't know if we don't have his records, do we?
We don't. Unfortunately, I talked to Kenny and try to get some. But it's
at worst, like they were like 8-2.
Yeah, I don't even know. They might have been better than that. Yeah. So they were pretty good. And then, but the one guy that I think we really got to give a lot of time to here is Kurt Shoemaker.
Kurt Shoemaker, without question, and I'm going to say it now before we get to the end. He's definitely going to be in the top of who we're going to talk about as far as overall. And Kurt, we called him Shoe. Shoe was just an unbelievable athlete,
right?
And he made everything. You look at athletes, that they work so hard at it.
Made it look easy.
Shoe made it look so easy.
Yep.
Just the way he flowed, and it was the same thing in basketball.
Yeah.
I mean, he could just make it look so easy, go around guys, in basketball, and he could score at will. But in football, I mean, Vince just helped him become just potentially at the time, probably the best quarterback in the city.
Absolutely, no doubt about it.
Yeah,
no doubt about it. I mean, and I'm sure you've got some stats there on him too. I mean, just what he's done in his just listen to this. Listen to this.
Unbelievable. So for his whole high school years, and we could probably go back to his junior high years. You can say that doesn't count, but you want to talk about a winner,
right?
So his high school years, playing freshman and then sophomore, junior, senior year, he was 48-1.
That alone right there,
48-1.
Incredible. That is incredible. No, who does that?
No, well, only Shoe.
Yeah.
Only Shoe. Right.
Yep.
I mean, for as far as quarterbacks go, he threw for he threw for over 3,200 yards and had 20 plus touchdowns, and all these aren't exact.
Right. We're just
but it's pretty close. He was the conference player of the year, and then he went on the basketball team that I helped coach with Frank Brandy, and he was on a basketball team that went 20-1. Guy's a winner.
Oh, there's no doubt about it, and just not only a winner on and off the field, but he's off the field too. He's just a great human being as you'll ever want to.
Humble.
Oh, just a great all-around guy, and probably, guy that I remember doing all the games that I've done is probably had just a phenomenal leader.
He would make plays, and he went on, Danny, to I believe University of Akron.
Yeah, and then he went to UC.
And then he transferred back to UC, and he was behind some unbelievable quarterbacks down there. Yeah. But I can't say this enough about any sport, any guy. You get to that level, not many guys get to that level. Whether you get on the field or not, the fact that you're there says something about you.
Absolutely. And another guy that I have to talk about that's really special to me too is that is considered is going to, and I'll say he's going to be in there too in the mix up there, but Daniel Rod.
Correct.
Is another one. Another one, like we talked with Shoemaker, great leader, everything is so. Get into a little bit of the stats that we have with Daniel Rod that we know of with him. I mean, again, it's an unbelievable stats that we're going to throw out. And these, again, aren't accurate acts. I mean, we don't actually have how many yards he threw for, but some of these other accomplishments are pretty special.
Well, before I get in, I just want to say this. If I'm 10 years old, 20 years old, 50, 70 years old, and I'm playing a pickup game of anything, he's my first pick.
Absolutely.
Because he's an absolute gamer.
Oh, he's very intense. And I'll give you an example is this alumni golf outing we do. He doesn't want to lose.
He doesn't want to lose at checkers.
Yeah, he doesn't want to lose.
Yeah, and I love Daniel. I got to coach him in basketball, and great family, and just a competitor that you love to be around. And you can tell that what he did, and I'm going to give the stats here, what he did fed off on everybody. And when we interviewed him in the podcast with him and John Runk, you could see that. It bled off onto John Runk and all those other guys that were so successful.
I'm going to tell you something. I got an email from John Runk when he saw that we were doing this.
Yeah.
And wrote a nice, big, long letter explaining why he thought Daniel Rod deserved to be in the top 10 or the top quarterback. And that just speaks volumes of the man that Daniel Rod is. And but again, the Rod family is a great family. Carol's great, Wayne's great. Yep. And then Kenny. Great running back too. So that whole family is very special in Anderson High School history. And they've got a special place in Anderson High School.
Well, no question. Their daughters were very successful as well.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about Daniel's stats here. So he was 22-4 as a starter, 9-1 in the playoffs.
That's amazing. We lost in a state championship game.
9-1.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
I mean, guys were lucky, we talk about no disrespect to Jason Bell, but you got to play a couple games.
Right.
Daniel Rod got to play 10.
Yeah.
And he was 9-1.
That's incredible.
He was, they won the league both years, regional 8 champions. He was first team all league, of course, first team all city, of course, honorable mention all region. And this is the thing that separates the men from the boys here, Danny, is that he is the only quarterback to ever win a state championship for Anderson High School.
And to me, on mine, that's going to loom large for me when I get to my top 10. That's going to be because I had a tough time between a couple guys. Yeah. And that was the deciding factor for me when we get to that point. So we'll talk about that.
And then he went on and they went to the state championship again his senior year and unfortunately lost. But I mean, to play in the state championship twice, but
is amazing.
But here's the thing, and we've talked about this about Timmy and about other guys, is that Daniel, was, as I said, he's my number one pick for any pickup game.
Right.
He was unbelievable quarterback, but he was also really good at basketball.
Yep, baseball.
And then baseball was his main sport. He went on to play baseball at Xavier.
Yeah.
So, I mean, here's a guy, and to be honest with you, he might be one of those 5 guys that were captain of 3 sports as well.
Yeah, it could have been. So you got to throw kind of Timmy and Daniel Rod are kind of one of those guys that are special. I mean, we've had some great quarterback, but, you got to keep in mind, I don't think Shu played baseball.
Right.
But you can't just go on that alone. We're going on everything. But Daniel Rod was very special.
A gamer. There's no question.
Absolutely. There's one guy that I don't remember when he played. This is how old I'm getting, right? This is how old I'm getting. But Ryan Collier played.
Sure.
He was a damn good quarterback.
He was really good.
Damn good quarterback.
Yeah.
And
he had a great year.
And so I apologize to Ryan, and I got to... we're just old. I don't remember when he played. It was in the 2000s, I thought.
Yeah.
And I just don't remember when he played, but he had some unbelievable stats too. He deserves to be in that consideration too.
No, I think he had real good stats. I think he I mean, we don't have the stats in front of us, but I think if I remember, he had a lot of touchdowns and not very many interceptions, which we talk about those percentages is really good. Yep. And I think, I'm not sure if he played his junior year, but I know he had an unbelievable senior year.
Yeah, he was incredible. So, that kind of rounds out our in the 2000s, and now we're going to hit into the decade that we're into now, right?
Right.
And I'll be honest, there's only two. We go from 2010 to 20, and both of them are outstanding quarterbacks that everybody's going to know about. And the first one is Jay Volpenheim, the second one is Jackson Kuhn.
Well, okay, so going back, do you remember any of those quarterbacks? Now, we're not talking that long ago.
That played before them?
Yeah.
I do. You got Kevin Rogers. Kevin Rogers played. He did very well. Ran the ball, threw the ball. You had,
I'm putting you on the spot.
I'm drawing a blank on his name. He played quarterback for a couple years too. You're killing me here. I forgot his name. That's sad. But there's just been some good quarterbacks before then. But again, things were different. They didn't with Daniel and them, and then when they transitioned, they ran the ball a little bit more. They didn't throw the ball as much, and so that was a little bit different. But these two guys, Jay Volpenheim and Jackson Kuhn, and
ridiculous numbers.
You got these stats for. Let's start off with Jay Volpenheim.
All right, so Jay, right now as it stands, he's the all-time leading passer in Anderson history, and rightfully so. When you hear some of these stats, so he did play some as a sophomore. He had over 500 yards and 3 touchdowns. But his junior year, he had 3,541 yards, and he passed for 43 touchdowns.
That's amazing.
But the bigger stat, you talk like in basketball, you talk about steals and turnovers. Right. Well, this guy had 43 touchdowns, but only 13 interceptions, and he threw the ball 490 times.
Think about that. That's pretty impressive when you only throw 13 interceptions. As many times as you throw that football, that's impressive.
And you throw it that many times, and he almost cracked 1,000 yards in rushing.
It's incredible.
Which is unbelievable.
Yeah, and I know that in junior year, I think he got a lot of all this, all that. Mm-hmm. And I don't know exactly, specifically everything. I know at one point, it might have been his senior year, he was all-state.
Definitely senior year, he was all-state. Yeah, and in senior year, he had a great year as well. 35 touchdowns, only 10 interceptions. He threw the ball 424 times, 3,800 yards. Unbelievable. He did have over 1,000 yards rushing. So here's a quarterback in 2 years combined had over 2,000 yards rushing.
Wow,
a quarterback.
It's incredible. And I know, Steve, and I can't remember exactly where he stands in Ohio high school history.
Yeah,
he's in the top. I want to say top 25.
How can he not be?
Yeah. So I mean, as many yards as he's thrown. So obviously he's a guy that we have to think about.
So where did he go on to play?
Well, he went to Tiffin and redshirted a couple years, and now he's at Thomas More.
Thomas More.
Yep. So he's there at Thomas More.
Which there's some Anderson football coaches over there.
Chris Norwell.
Yep.
And Scott Peters. Scott Peters
and I think Mike Cook was over there.
Mike Cook. Yep. So let's get into Jackson Kuhn. Obviously, just graduated this year.
Yep.
Great quarterback too as well. So his junior year, he was 181, 320, 2,095 yards, 20 touchdowns, and only 7 interceptions. And then he had 5 touchdowns rushing. But his senior year, 265, 395, 3,416 yards, 24 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. But he had 18 touchdowns rushing too as well.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me is just... So Jackson Kuhn is another one that, pass heavy oriented, but Jackson can run the football. Jackson led the team to, with playoffs this past year.
Yeah, played LaSalle.
And he was a play away against Turpin for making it 2 years in a row. There was just a bad ending to that game, and he could have had him 2 years in a row to the playoffs. So, So Jackson Kuhn's another one that's got to be considered in the top 10. So I think what we're going to do is here, I'm going to wrap up. We're going to give you, Steve's going to give you the fan voting that in its specific order here is what the fans voted for on social media, and then Steve and I are going to get into our top 10. So interesting, pretty close to see that what we have and some of these additions and subtractions that we're going to make.
Right, and and to little disclaimer here, Danny, is that a lot of these votes were from guys from the last 20, 30 years, and so no disrespect to the 70s or 60s or 50s and all the way back to Bob Moore. So, but here is what the voting that came in, Danny. We had Kurt Shoemaker up at the top.
Yep.
You know what? I'm going to go backwards. Go back to number 10. All right. So Steve Lanhart. So that was fair to get him in there.
Absolutely.
People had
noticed him
on social media, put some votes on him. Then there was a tie with Rob Thuman and Mike Goyer.
Right.
All right, which is strong right there in itself. Starting off with the Vince Sirianni era, and then there's another tie with Jackson Kuhn and Randy Cummings. Both two quality quarterbacks. Obviously, Kuhn's probably got a little better stats, than Cummings. So I'd probably be a little biased on the Kuhn part.
Absolutely,
especially since his dad. I know his dad real well.
Yeah. I mean,
coaches.
And again, this is what people are voting that have known everybody, and they probably don't. They don't follow football like we do.
Right.
So they don't know. Some of these guys are out of town, out of state, whatever. Right. They don't know about Jackson.
Right.
So Doug, I hope you understand that this isn't by no means.
Right. And then Jason Bell, which, obviously we talked about, what his accomplishments were. Kenny Rydell. All right. And then we get into the top four. So we have Jay Volpenheim, who's, if you're going to go by stats, this guy's going to be up there.
Oh, absolutely.
No question about it. And then we got Timmy Albers, which you take him out of his era and put him in, the early 2000s and see how that turns out for him. And then the top two, which I don't think anybody would waver, would be Daniel Rod and Kurt Shoemaker.
Yeah, again, great. So this was voting by the fans on social media through Twitter, Facebook, on the alumni page and all that. So that was just, and if we would have kept this going, we probably could have pinpointed a little bit better with what they had.
Yeah.
But okay, so what I did is I took all that into consideration and I kind of sat down and I wrote down what I thought my top 10. But I'm going to lie a little bit here. I'm going to go outside. It's a little bit outside the top 10. I'm going to have 12. So boy, it was hard for me to do this.
Way to make everyone happy.
Yeah. So, but I just kind of wanted, these guys were my honorable mention, but that could have been close to the top, the top 10, whatever. So I had Randy Cummings and Jay Sullivan at number 12, basically tied.
Because they threw you the ball.
Basically, yeah, that had a lot to do with it. And then Mike Goy and Rob Thuman were real close for me just because of what they did, and we don't have a lot of stats on them, but what they've done for Anderson High School football and know what we know, they were right outside the top 10, so they were there.
Yeah.
So then my number 10 is going to be Ken Burns and Jim Dorna.
The combo.
Because they won the 61 championship.
Fair enough.
I had to put them in there. Yeah, they deserve. And then I had number 9. I had Bob Moore.
Yep.
Bob Moore again was a 48 champion. Did very well on that. And then I'm going to have to go with Jackson Kuhn. Jackson Kuhn, number 8. Jackson could probably be up a little bit higher. I mean, now I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, oh man, did I do this right? You look at when you hurry up and you're trying to do it off the cuff. Jackson probably could be in the top 5, but I had him listed at 8.
And definitely in the conversation.
Right. And I had Steve Lanhart at number 7. And the reason I had Steve is just because of going to Vandy, playing at the Peach Bowl, and going into the pros with Green Bay. So, there's a little bit of that. Then I had Kenny Rydell. Kenny Rydell I had at number 6. Can pass, could run, just an all-around great athlete. And then I went to Jason Bell. Mm-hmm. Jason Bell's a great leader, everything he has. Yep. And I know people are going to scoff at this and say I'm full of crap.
Don't say that.
But my brother Timmy I had at 4. And there's a lot of reasons. And one, because he's my brother. And number 2 is that knowing him and watching him grow up and seeing him play, Timmy would have thrown for probably 3, just as much as Jay Volpenheim did back if he would have been thrown for him.
It's not biased, Danny. The stats speak for themselves. So you can throw that just because his last name's Albers out the window. Timmy was a damn good quarterback, and so I had him at number 4. I had these next 3 guys. Obviously, everybody's going to know who it is already, and this was extremely hard to choose between these 3. And so I just broke it down to a couple things. Right, I had Jay Volpenheim at number 3, and he can very well be number 1, close to number 1. Right. Mm-hmm.
But I just felt that these next two guys that I had in my top 10, I actually had them tied, but I did a tiebreaker, right? Mm-hmm. I had Kurt Shoemaker at number 2, but I had them both tied with Daniel Rod, okay? The only reason I had Kurt Shoemaker at 2 and Daniel Rod as number 1 is because Daniel Rod won a state championship, and Daniel Rod went to the state championship again 2 years in a row. That trumps Shoemaker, but by not much.
Yeah.
You go 48-1, that's pretty special. So that was kind of my top 10, and I'll be honest, I'm looking at it now, and I could probably rotate some of these guys in and out. Like, I'm looking at it now, Jackson probably could move up some.
Yep.
He might even go up a little bit more than Kenny or Jason, maybe in the top 5.
Yeah.
So that's, now that I look at it, that might. But I was doing this off the cuff and trying to get it in and see where we go with that. But what do you have for your? I mean, that's pretty similar. Or?
It is very similar. But I want to say this: we haven't talked about this. In all due respect to all these quarterbacks, is that we have to keep in mind that there are some of these guys that competed both in the regular season and in the state playoffs at the Division II level,
right? As
opposed to some guys that competed in the Division I level.
True point.
Against the Molars and the St. X's and Elders, those type of teams. And so, like when we talk about Daniel Rod and Kurt Shoemaker went up against the Division I schools,
right?
And is absolutely no disrespect to Daniel, for what they did. And we talk about all this all the time about some of those teams, especially the Kurt Shoemaker teams. If they would have been in Division II, we could have had 3 or 4 state championship rings.
Totally agree.
All right, so here is my top 10, just based upon what little I know, and help of you and everybody else. But just give some respect to Bob Moore.
Absolutely.
Number 10.
Yep, that's a good one.
Because of what he had accomplished. And I'm not trying to be funny here, but he probably played without a face mask.
Oh, yeah.
Back then.
Yeah.
So,
that's a tough guy right there.
That's got to say something, right?
Yeah.
And then tied for number 8, I have is Jason Bell and Mike Goyer.
Yeah.
Okay.
2 good ones right there.
All right.
And think about that, though, too. They split time.
That's kind of why I did that.
Yeah, they split time, and they kind of got the momentum rolling for Anderson.
Right. And then from there, I go up to number 7, which I put Jackson Kuhn in there.
Yep.
Had unbelievable couple seasons, for the yardage he put up.
Absolutely.
And hopefully, I'm not sure what he's doing, if he's going on. I don't think he is. Yeah, but he had some unbelievable numbers, and it was really fun to watch him play.
Right.
Then the next 2 guys I have up here, just because not only they have great careers at Anderson, but they went on and had real good careers in college. Number 6, I got Rick Bidos, which he didn't have, but we're just briefly the little knowledge we have.
Right.
He had got some interest from major Division I colleges like Tennessee, and he went on to Southwest Missouri State and played.
Right.
So I have him number 6. Then Steve Lanhart, which obviously we talked about what he did, going on to play at Vandy and then into the pros. So it's hard not to talk about him.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have him as number 5. Number 4, I think we're all in agreement, at least you and I are, with Timmy Albers and what he accomplished. Does he have the stats as Jackson Kuhn or some of these other guys? No. But what, when we can throw everything in there, how athletic he was, the leadership and the time period that he was playing in, as opposed to now, if Dwyer was a coach back then, it's the amount of times they throw. It's hard not to put him in the top 5.
Agreed.
Is in my idea, my thoughts. And then number 3, we're going to be on the same page here with Volpenheim.
Yep.
What the crazy stats that he put up, with just it was so fun to watch.
Absolutely.
And it's just crazy to think about, throwing 43 touchdowns and 30. I mean, he had 78 touchdowns.
That's incredible.
I mean, be lucky somebody be fired up just to score 1 touchdown in their career.
Now, I want to tell you a real quick story about Jay Volpenheim. I remember going out to when Anderson played out in West Virginia.
Yeah.
And they beat that team, and Jay just went nuts.
And they were really good, too.
This is what meant something to me and how special this kid was. After the game, he sees me and comes up and gives me a hug and said that was for the alumni. I mean, he knew what that was all about.
How about that?
So that is a stand-up guy, Jay Volpenheim was, and that meant something to me as a former player. And doing that, to come and give me a hug, he didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
That shows right now the leadership that he has.
Leadership and going out of state and playing a really good team and winning.
Yeah, that was big. So,
what's that say about Anderson football?
Absolutely.
It's pretty strong. All right, and then the top two were in agreement as the people that voted were with Kurt Shoemaker and Daniel Rod. I got him 1 and 1A.
It's got to be. I mean,
and that's not just staying on the fence there.
Right.
I mean, just comparing. One played, had an unbelievable career and wins. The other one had unbelievable career and won a state championship.
Right.
If I'm going to have to choose, I'm probably going to go with Daniel Rod. Yeah. But Kurt Shoemaker, to me, Daniel was just a gamer. I mean, you could put Daniel at linebacker and he'd had an unbelievable career.
I agree.
Kurt Shoemaker, when you think about prolific quarterbacks, he would potentially be a poster child for Anderson quarterbacks.
No
But Daniel Rod winning the state championship and going back his senior year is right there as well.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like you said, we both were at the same with 1A and 1B, and the only reason I went with Daniel was just because of state championship. I mean, that was my tiebreaker, but you certainly can say that our top two quarterbacks in Anderson High School history were Daniel Rod and Kurt Shoemaker.
And when we go back to what we looked at, how athletic they were, the stats, the era they were in, the leadership that they provided, they meet all those criteria that qualifies them for me 1 and 1A.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Steve, this was so fun to do, and what's trouble about this is we're doing this for other sports.
Yeah,
and it's going to be extremely hard for us on these other sports like soccer and baseball,
basketball.
It's going to be extremely hard for us because we might not know as much as I know. Like I know a lot about the football. You might know it's going to be a struggle.
We'll get more input.
Yeah.
And people are going to have some doubts about what we say here.
Oh, there's no doubt.
But we're getting feedback, and you can't say it enough. Apologies for the guys that we missed, and you had even talked about how Nicky Tarpoff and Matt Dills could probably be in consideration as well. Yeah, and we could say that about a lot of guys.
Yep. There's no doubt about it.
But this is just a good, cool thing to have conversation. Hopefully, everybody will enjoy listening to this.
I think everybody's excited about it. We'll put something out there, and then we'll try to do this. I don't know if we can do it once a week because it's going to be too hard because we want to collect some information. We might do it like once a month or something.
Once a month probably be better.
And try to get. So we don't know which way. If we're going to stick with football for a little bit, if we're going to go to another sport and then come back to football, we might just stick with football and go on to another sport after. I don't know what we're going to do yet. But no, Steve, it's been a lot of fun, man. And
thanks.
Can't wait to do our next This Week in Anderson. We're still working on a couple people for that and continue to do these broadcasts. So we're going to wrap it up here. So for Steve Ellis, Dan Albers, you've been listening to our top 10 quarterbacks in Anderson history on a Big Eye Sports podcast and USBN Sports. We'll talk to everybody later.